The 50mm 1.4 VCM was one of the Canon's most anticipated lenses, so today I will share with you my first impressions and test results so that you can make a better decision yourself if you are wondering about buying it. I will show you how much the lens relies on software corrections. You will find out how this lens compares to the cheap 51.8 STM. I have prepared a test chart for you, and at the end I will share with you my thoughts and evaluation as well as summary in a nutshell, all the pros and cons before you make your own decision. Hello and welcome. My name is Rafał and I am a nature and landscape photographer based in Poland. Consider subscribing and liking. I'm thinking about spinning off this English version of my channel, so your subscription and like will help me a lot to make that decision. So I took this lens exclusively for a short winter family trip where I also had a chance to take it for a full day dedicated nature and hiking photo outing. While the conditions were not perfect for lens testing, they were great for moody winter forest photos. The VCM series of lenses from Canon currently includes 24, 35 and 50mm focal lengths, and they are characterized by the same dimensions and similar weight as well as a popular 67mm filter size. All this so that you can easily switch between them while filming without problems with balancing the gimbal and also with the use of tools to control focus or aperture. This means that we've got something that hasn't been in a Canon lens since the FD mount, an aperture ring. I'll talk about it later. These lenses are also distinguished by the VCM designation, responsible for the voice call motor that drives the autofocus system, and it is the fastest and the quickest autofocus I ever used. It works almost instantly, so in combination with excellent autofocus capabilities of Canon bodies, it will be a reliable element of such a set. I have virtually no blurry photos. By the way, you can also see another feature of this series of lenses, which is the practical lack of focus breathing. That is, the change in the field of view depending on the focus distance, which could distract some viewers. Here it is practically eliminated. Interestingly, VCM technology has a characteristic that after disconnecting the power, you can feel a moving element inside, but it did not cause me any problems. It sits there quietly and surely. I was a bit worried that it would wobble during the hike, but it was perfectly fine. I haven't observed any of such issues. Since we are talking about physical features, this lens weighs about 600 grams and it's about 10 centimeters long, all in all acceptable size and weight, even for all-day handheld shooting. The aperture ring works perfectly smoothly and with very good resistance. Although I didn't think I would use it, I quickly become convinced that smooth adjustment in this way while filming is very convenient and improves ergonomics, especially it is easy to find right next to the camera mount. On the other hand, when photographing, I didn't miss it at all, and although only the latest cameras support the ring in photo mode, it doesn't really matter that much in my opinion. I didn't find any use for the button on the lens, but it's there. If you use it yourself, let me know what for in the comments. Interestingly, since photo mode completely ignores aperture setting, I could just have pre-configured aperture whenever I switch to movie mode, as the aperture ring setting will override whatever else you have pre-selected in custom video modes, for example. Of course, we also have a clicking control ring. I have it assigned to exposure compensation. It works great in manual mode with auto ISO enabled. Another physical feature is the weather sealing. It immediately came in handy on my first trip. Recently, Canon started introducing them also in cheaper lenses without a red ring, so I hope that the rubber seal will no longer be a synonym of luxury at Canon. Nevertheless, I expected it and I used it, but it's time to deal with the image quality. I know that many people watching this test are waiting for information on how strong the corrections are here in the camera. So I will start with this topic. Personally, I have nothing against correcting distortion this way. because in return we get sharper and lighter builds. It actually has no negative effects as far as I'm concerned. We have higher effective resolution and access to lenses that were not previously available. It is different with vignetting though. Here it can introduce additional noise, especially with aggressive photo correction in low light. But of course this also is related to the size of the front element and weight, so there are some pros and cons to that solution as well. So how does the matter look in the tested lens? When it comes to distortion, here I have good news. We only have a slight pincushion, so I have no reason to complain. At this focal length, this is rather not a problem, and the software corrections are quite cosmetic. On the other hand, vignetting is much worse. At aperture 1.4, it is as much as 2 stops of light less in the corners. What's happening here? Closing to f2 slightly improves the situation by 1 stop, but interestingly, further closing does not cause a significant improvement, and this vignette always occurs in some form, even after closing to f11, although of course it's not as strong anymore. How does it look in practice? I often leave the natural vignette in portraits, but here I have to remove it a bit because the effect looked too strong, even unnatural. I think this is a compromise resulting from assumptions of the VCM series, but it's a bit of shame that it's not better. How is the sharpness of this lens? Excuse the slightly improvised test chart. Starting from 1.4 we have excellent sharpness and great contrast, and for the closing the aperture doesn't really change it anyhow, and this sharpness stays this way until f11 when the diffraction kicks in. Now let's look at the image corners. Here at 1.4 it's sharp, but not as razor sharp as it was in the center. You need to close it to around 2.8 to get really razor sharp images that stay that sharp just around f11 where the diffraction kicks in again. Very good results, which I'm very happy about, because in the range from 1.8 to 4.0 on the cheap 50mm 1.8 STM, you had to watch out for what lands in the corner. Are you curious how big these differences are? 1.8 STM on the left, new VCM 1.4 on the right. Differences in the corners are clear, but this also shows that from 4.0 these differences are not so much visible, and confirms my general observations that the Nifty 50 is a very underrated lens, because for typical landscape apertures it offers great quality in a compact package and at affordable price. But summing up the test results, the new 50mm delivers sharpness across the entire frame from the full aperture, which is what we expect from the lens at this price. Since we discussed sharpness, let's look at the blur. And here, of course, this is very subjective and everyone may have different preferences. I really like this aspect of the new 1.4 because the lens beautifully blurs the background, has a very nice transition from sharpness to blurry parts. And in addition, it has very subtle swirly bokeh effect, which, by the way, I saw also on 35 1.4, and I think James Reader also showed this on 50mm 1.2. All this makes the photographed person or other object literally pop out of the photo. Interestingly, in some extreme situations, we can notice some slight outlines and onion rings when we enlarge 1:1. But generally it is practically invisible and the resulting bokeh is buttery smooth. Another interesting fact is that on the 50mm 1.8 STM you can get more blur due to the fact that the 1.4 has a slightly longer minimum focus distance. But of course this comes at the expense of the field of view. Related to bokeh is longitudinal chromatic aberration. And at 1.4 you can see slight discoloration beyond the focus point, which is less visible at f2 and practically disappears at f2.8. In general, the lens has very well controlled chromatic aberrations. When shooting against the light on contrasting edges, it's difficult to find discoloration. Everything is sharp and clean. Finally, it's worth looking at the work against the light, because this is unfortunately not the strong side of this lens. If you expect a lack of flares and good contrast here, you will be disappointed. I'm a bit surprised because Canon usually had good results here. Personally, I like to use such flares in my photos. They are also usually welcome in movies, unless you want to do some VFX, then you really don't want your lens to mess up with the image. I didn't know to what extent this is intentional and to what extent it's a blunder. In my subjective opinion, this feature strongly and positively influences the character of the photos. Combined with a blurred background and slightly swirly bokeh, the flares create a nice set that distinguishes the image coming out of this instrument. So I think it's time for my subjective opinion after a few sessions spent with this lens. I must say I really like final results that I get. Sharpness across the entire image, no chromatic aberrations, buttery smooth background blur gives a very modern look to photos and videos as well. While the subtle swirly bokeh, quite pronounced flares add some character. I really like the final effect and enjoyed looking at my photos from this lens. But you also should know that I like vintage lenses like Helios 44M, so I have certain visual preferences. As you can imagine, a lot of it is subjective assessment and personal expectations, so you have to judge for yourself whether it's something you like or not, especially at this price point where you would expect a lens without those imperfections. Would I like it without them? Probably not. So I'm curious about your opinions. Now it's time for the promised quick summary. So here are the pros: sharpness, well-controlled aberrations, very fast and quiet VCM autofocus, minimal pincushion distortion, as well as the aperture control ring. And subjectively, for me, very nice final image, modern but with character. Now time for cons. Definitely strong vignetting and performance against light. And obviously high price, which might change in the future. So I hope this review will help you to make a decision. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them in the comment sections below. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe, comment and like. I'm making now a decision whether to continue doing content in English. Should I invest more time in this? If you find this useful, consider doing that. Thanks a lot. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching and hope you have a great day. Bye.